The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin, but it was drowned out by the piercing cries of a baby. Emma, just 6 months old, wailed in her father's arms. Billionaire Richard Whittaker, one of America's most successful businessmen, shifted uncomfortably in his spacious first-class seat. His tailored suit, his wealth, his influence, none of it could calm his daughter. He bounced her gently, whispered soothing words, even tried a bottle, but nothing worked. The baby cried louder, her tiny fists flailing, her face red with distress. Passengers began to stir with irritation. Some rolled their eyes, others muttered under their breath. A few even covered their ears with frustration. Flight attendants rushed forward with polite but ineffective suggestions. "Maybe she's hungry, sir. Perhaps she needs to walk a bit. Shall I bring some warm milk?" Richard tried everything they offered, but Emma's cries continued like an unrelenting storm. For the first time in years, Richard felt powerless. He could close multi-million-dollar deals in boardrooms. He could negotiate contracts with presidents and CEOs. But here, thousands of feet above the ground, he couldn't give his only daughter the one thing she needed: comfort. The more Emma cried, the more visible Richard became. Whispers ran through the cabin. "That's Richard Whittaker, the billionaire. Can't even calm his own baby." For a man who had built his life on control and success, the judgment stung. He looked around, embarrassed, desperate, wishing for the impossible, for Emma to stop crying. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The baby's cries echoed through the pressurized cabin, bouncing off every wall, pressing on every heart. And in that moment, Richard realized something money could never buy: peace of mind. He had hired the best nannies, read every parenting guide his assistant ordered, yet none of it prepared him for this reality. Emma's cries grew louder. Richard's confidence shrank smaller. Passengers sighed, attendants fumbled, and the world's wealthiest man sat in silence holding his child, unable to help her. And then, just when frustration filled the cabin like heavy smoke, something unexpected happened. From the back of the plane, a quiet, steady voice spoke up, not from a fellow executive, not from a trained professional, but from a teenage boy in economy class. "Sir," the boy said gently. "May I try?" Every head turned. A poor black boy, barely 16, was offering to do what a billionaire and an entire flight crew could not. No one realized it yet, but this moment would change all of their lives forever. The cabin went silent for a split second, as if the boy's voice had cut through the tension like a sharp blade. Passengers turned their heads, curious and skeptical. Who was this teenager in the worn-out hoodie, his backpack tucked beneath his seat? What made him believe he could succeed where everyone else, including a billionaire father and trained flight attendants, had failed? Richard looked up, exhausted, Emma still sobbing in his arms. His eyes met the boy's, and for a brief moment Richard saw something unusual. Calmness. Not arrogance, not naivety, just steady confidence. "You?" Richard asked, his voice low, laced with both disbelief and a hint of desperation. "You think you can help her?" The boy nodded respectfully. "I've taken care of my baby cousins since I was little. Sometimes it's about rhythm, not just rocking. May I?" Gasps rippled through the cabin. A businessman whispered to his neighbor, "This is ridiculous." "Just sit down, kid," another passenger muttered. "What's he going to do? Sing to the baby?" But Richard, trapped between humiliation and hope, hesitated. Every logical thought told him to refuse. He didn't know this boy. He had no reason to trust him. And yet, something in the boy's eyes carried sincerity that no amount of wealth could manufacture. Finally, Richard exhaled heavily and gave a small nod. "All right, show me." The boy slowly walked down the aisle. His sneakers squeaked softly against the carpet, every step followed by dozens of skeptical stares. When he reached Richard's seat, he paused, respectful but unafraid. "May I hold her, sir?" he asked. Richard hesitated again, instinctively tightening his grip on Emma. The billionaire who trusted lawyers, bankers, and business partners without question now found himself struggling to trust a stranger with the most precious thing in his world. But Emma's cries had grown desperate, and Richard knew he had no other choice. With careful hands, he passed his daughter to the boy. The moment Emma was in his arms, something changed. The boy didn't bounce her too quickly or shush her loudly. Instead, he held her against his chest, humming softly. The melody wasn't a song most passengers recognized. It was simple, soothing, almost like a lullaby passed down through generations. His hand tapped a gentle rhythm on her back, not hurried, not forced, just steady and reassuring. To everyone's astonishment, Emma's cries began to soften. Her fists unclenched, her breathing slowed. Within minutes, the cabin that had been filled with chaos now held a fragile peace. A woman in business class whispered, "Oh my God." "He did it." Another passenger shook his head in disbelief. "Unthinkable. Absolutely unthinkable." Richard sat frozen, watching his daughter's tiny eyelids flutter closed. His chest tightened, not just with relief, but with humility. A boy from the back of the plane had accomplished what all his wealth, status, and resources could not. The boy smiled faintly, adjusting Emma so she rested more comfortably. "Babies like rhythm," he explained softly. "Their heartbeat in the womb is steady. If you can match that rhythm, they feel safe." Richard blinked, astonished. He hadn't expected a lecture in neuroscience from a teenager in a thrift store hoodie. Who are you?" he asked. The boy hesitated, unsure if he'd overstepped, but then answered politely. "My name's Noah. I'm 16. From Chicago." Richard studied him for a long moment, curiosity replacing his exhaustion. Who was this boy with the extraordinary patience to calm a baby and the confidence to step forward when everyone else stayed silent? Meanwhile, the passengers' attitudes shifted. Where there had been annoyance and judgment, now there was respect, perhaps even admiration. People who once rolled their eyes now leaned forward, eager to hear what Noah might say next. Richard leaned back, still stunned, and whispered almost to himself, "Unbelievable." A stranger did the unthinkable. But Noah didn't bask in the attention. He wasn't seeking glory. He simply handed Emma back, now peacefully asleep, and said humbly, "She just needed comfort. That's all." In that moment, the boy from economy class and the billionaire father both understood something. This wasn't about money, status, or even parenting techniques. It was about compassion, and compassion could come from the most unexpected places. What Richard didn't know was that this small act of kindness was only the beginning. The quiet teenager who had just saved him from embarrassment was far more than he appeared, and their lives were about to intertwine in ways neither of them could have predicted. For a few seconds, no one moved. The silence in the cabin was so complete that it felt unreal, as if time itself had paused. Only the steady hum of the engines filled the air, blending with the faint rhythm of Noah's lullaby still echoing in memory. Emma, the baby who had cried for what felt like an eternity, now lay quietly against Richard's chest. Her tiny breaths rose and fell, her face serene, her fists unclenched. The storm that had consumed the cabin had been replaced by a peace so profound that even the flight attendants exchanged bewildered glances. Passengers who had been on the verge of complaining now leaned back in their seats, some with shy smiles, others with open astonishment. A woman in first class whispered, "I've never seen anything like that." A businessman shook his head slowly, muttering, "Impossible. Absolutely impossible." And yet it had happened. Richard sat frozen, staring at his daughter, then back at Noah, as if trying to make sense of the miracle he had just witnessed. His mind, accustomed to solving billion-dollar problems, struggled to process how a boy with nothing but patience and compassion had succeeded where he had failed. You really did it," Richard said finally, his voice cracking with relief. His usual polished, commanding tone was gone. What came out was raw, human. Noah shifted uncomfortably under the weight of so many eyes. "It's nothing, sir. Babies just need to feel safe. My cousins cry all the time. You learn what works after a while." But Richard knew it wasn't nothing. This boy, dressed in a worn hoodie and old sneakers, had just given him something no money could buy: peace of mind and a reminder of humility. The passengers, who had moments ago been annoyed and judgmental, now looked at Noah differently. Their expressions softened. Some even clapped quietly, hesitant at first, then louder until the sound of applause rippled through the cabin. Noah's face flushed. He hadn't done it for recognition. He wasn't seeking applause. For him, calming a baby was simply instinct born out of love and responsibility. But for everyone else in that cabin, it felt like they had just witnessed the unthinkable. A poor boy succeeding where privilege and power had failed. Richard turned to Noah. "How did you know what to do?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Noah shrugged. "I guess when you grow up with a lot of little ones around, you learn. My mom works 2 jobs, so I babysit my cousins. Sometimes all they need is rhythm. something steady that tells them they're safe. His words were simple, but they carried a wisdom that silenced even the most skeptical passengers. Richard's throat tightened. For years he had surrounded himself with experts, financial advisors, lawyers, consultants, people who charged thousands of dollars an hour for their knowledge. And yet in this moment it was a 16-year-old boy who had given him the most valuable lesson of all. He glanced at Emma, still sleeping peacefully, then back at Noah. "Thank you," Richard said, and for the first time in a long while, his gratitude felt unpolished, uncalculated, real. Noah smiled faintly, lowering his gaze. "You don't have to thank me, sir. Anyone would have done it." But Richard knew that wasn't true. He had watched an entire cabin of people turn away, unwilling to risk embarrassment or failure. It had been Noah, this boy with nothing to prove, who had stepped forward. That courage alone set him apart. For the rest of the flight, the atmosphere shifted. Passengers who had once grumbled now relaxed. Attendants smiled more freely. And Richard, though still processing everything, felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. He kept glancing at Noah, curiosity gnawing at him. Who was this boy? Where did he come from? How could someone so young carry such calmness, such presence? Richard didn't know it yet. But this single moment, the unthinkable miracle of his daughter's peace, was only the beginning. Noah wasn't just a boy with a gift for babies. He carried something far greater. Resilience born from struggle, humility born from responsibility, and a quiet brilliance that would soon change both of their lives forever. The applause faded, and with it the restless energy of the cabin. The hum of the engines returned to dominance, but now it felt softer, calmer. Emma slept soundly in her father's arms, her tiny chest rising and falling like the tide. For the first time since the flight began, Richard allowed himself to breathe. His eyes, however, kept returning to Noah. The boy had slipped back into his seat in economy, almost as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He wasn't basking in attention, wasn't talking loudly or seeking praise. Instead, he pulled a small, worn notebook from his backpack and began scribbling furiously, as though the world around him had disappeared. Richard's curiosity sharpened. This wasn't the behavior of an ordinary teenager. Who takes notes right after calming a billionaire's baby? He leaned back thoughtful, his mind already racing with questions. An hour later, when the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers tried to rest, Richard couldn't resist any longer. He stood, carefully handed Emma to a flight attendant, and walked down the aisle. Passengers stirred, whispering as they saw the billionaire making his way toward the back of the plane. Noah looked up, surprised to see him. "Oh, sir," he said quickly, tucking the notebook away. "Don't hide it," Richard said gently. "What were you working on?" Noah hesitated, then slowly pulled the notebook back out. The pages were filled with lines of equations, graphs, and symbols that looked like they belonged in a university textbook. Richard blinked. "You wrote all this?" Noah nodded shyly. "Math problems. I'm practicing. There's an international competition in London. My community raised money for my ticket so I could compete. I can't afford to fail them." Richard sat down in the empty seat beside him, more intrigued than ever. "You're 16? "Yes, sir, 16. "And you're going to compete against the best students in the world?" "That's the plan," Noah said with a faint smile, though most of them had tutors and private schools. "I just teach myself, from library books and online videos." The billionaire stared, stunned. He thought of Emma's private nursery, the best doctors, the endless stream of resources that money had bought her before she'd even turned one. And here was a boy with almost nothing, no privilege, no polished environment. Yet his notebook overflowed with brilliance. "Why math?" Richard asked. "Because it's fair," Noah answered without hesitation. "Numbers don't care who you are, what color your skin is, or how much money you have. If you work hard, they give you answers, and those answers can change the world." Richard fell silent. The boy's words struck him harder than he expected. He had spent years in boardrooms, fighting battles where power and influence often bent the rules. To hear a teenager speak with such purity about fairness, it unsettled him. Finally, Richard asked, "What do you want to do with it? With math?" Noah's eyes lit up. "I want to design solutions, real ones, for communities like mine. Better water systems, cheaper energy grids, safer buildings. Where I come from, people survive on scraps. But I believe the same brilliance that builds skyscrapers in New York can build hope in places that have none. For a moment, Richard couldn't respond. He saw in Noah a reflection of something he had lost. Raw ambition untainted by greed. "You're remarkable, Noah," he said at last. "Most kids your age are thinking about video games or social media. You're thinking about changing the world." Noah shrugged, his humility disarming. "I just don't want my little cousins growing up the same way I did." Richard studied him carefully. A boy from the south side of Chicago, heading into a world stage with nothing but his own determination. It was a story more powerful than any business deal he had ever closed. As Richard returned to his seat later, Emma still sleeping soundly, a thought gnawed at him. Maybe meeting Noah wasn't coincidence. Maybe it was destiny. When the plane finally touched down in London, most passengers filed out quickly, eager to escape the long journey. But Richard walked slower, his mind replaying the events of the flight. He couldn't stop thinking about Noah, about the way the boy had soothed Emma, about the equations scrawled across his notebook, about the words that still echoed in his mind. Numbers don't care who you are. As Richard stepped into the terminal, he noticed Noah standing by himself, clutching his backpack tightly. While other passengers were greeted by families or whisked away by chauffeurs, Noah waited alone, his sneakers worn thin, his expression calm, but a little uncertain. Richard approached him. "Do you have a place to stay?" he asked. Noah blinked, surprised that the billionaire was still speaking to him. "Yes, sir. The competition organizers arranged a hostel for the participants. It's nothing fancy, but it'll do." Richard frowned. He imagined Noah, a boy representing his entire community, staying in a crowded hostel the night before the most important competition of his life. It didn't sit right with him. "Come with me instead," Richard said firmly. "I've booked a suite at the Corinthia Hotel. You'll be more comfortable there." Noah's eyes widened. "Sir, I can't. That place must cost more for one night than my family makes in months. I wouldn't feel right." Richard placed a hand on his shoulder. "You earned this, not because you calmed Emma, but because you've worked harder than most kids ever will. Sometimes opportunity knocks softly. You have to know when to answer." Noah hesitated, but the sincerity in Richard's voice left no room for doubt. Finally, he nodded. "All right. Thank you." The hotel suite was everything Noah had never experienced. Marble floors, chandeliers, soft robes folded neatly on the bed. He set his backpack down carefully, almost as if he was afraid to disturb the luxury around him. Richard watched quietly, realizing just how different their worlds truly were. Later that evening, Richard found Noah seated at the desk, scribbling in his notebook again. His focus was absolute, his pencil moving furiously across the page. Richard leaned closer and saw pages filled with complex algorithms and geometric designs. "You never stop, do you?" Richard asked with a faint smile. Noah shook his head. "When you grow up where I did, you don't get second chances. If I waste time, someone else loses faith in me, and I can't let that happen." There was no bitterness in his voice, only determination. Richard was struck by it. For years he had managed employees who complained about long hours, investors who balked at the smallest risks, yet here was a teenager who carried the weight of an entire community without flinching. "You remind me of myself at your age," Richard admitted, leaning against the desk. "Except you're stronger. I had wealth behind me. You've built yourself from nothing." Noah looked up, surprised at the compliment. "I just want to prove that where you start doesn't decide where you end." Richard felt a swell of respect he hadn't expected. He knew then that Noah wasn't just talented, he was extraordinary, and extraordinary people needed doors opened for them. "Tomorrow," Richard said, "you'll compete against the best minds in the world. But I want you to remember something. They may have had tutors in private schools, but none of them have your fire. That's your advantage. Don't ever forget it." Noah's eyes gleamed with gratitude. "I won't, sir." As Richard walked away, he couldn't help but smile. For years, his life had been measured in profits and losses, wins and deals. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he wasn't investing in stocks or companies. He was investing in something far rarer, a human being with limitless potential. And in the quiet of that London hotel room, the seed of an extraordinary bond had been planted. The morning of the International Mathematics Competition dawned crisp and cool in London. The grand auditorium buzzed with anticipation as hundreds of students from across the globe filed in, each representing the brightest minds from their respective countries. Flags from every corner of the world lined the walls, a sea of colors that symbolized the diversity of genius gathered in one place. In the front rows sat coaches, parents and sponsors, people who had invested years of resources into these young prodigies. But Noah Simon had none of that. No tutor, no wealthy family, no prep school background. All he carried with him was a worn-out backpack, the prayers of his community, and the fierce determination that had been forged in the streets of Southside Chicago. Richard sat quietly in the audience, Emma asleep in his arms. His gaze never left Noah. He saw not just a boy, but a warrior walking into battle, not with armor or weapons, but with nothing but the power of his mind. The competition began. Problems flashed on the giant screen, fiendishly complex equations, puzzles that twisted logic into knots, geometry that defied intuition. Competitors bent over their desks, furiously scribbling calculations. Some frowned, some muttered to themselves in frustration. But Noah was different. He leaned back for a moment, closing his eyes, as if he were listening to a melody only he could hear. Then his pencil moved, swift, confident, precise. Lines, numbers, and symbols poured onto the paper like water flowing from a spring. To him, these problems weren't obstacles. They were conversations. And mathematics was a language he spoke fluently. Minutes stretched into hours. The auditorium grew tense as competitors hit walls. Erasers rubbed paper raw and pressure mounted. Yet Noah stayed calm. His face glowed with focus, his hands steady as he tackled question after question. At one point, a particularly vicious equation appeared on the board. One that had even some of the top contestants shaking their heads. Gasps rippled through the audience, but Noah smiled. He remembered long nights back home, working by candlelight when the electricity was cut off, teaching himself advanced theorems from borrowed library books. He remembered his grandmother telling him, "When the world throws the hardest problems at you, that's when you show it your best answer." Within minutes, he had cracked the impossible problem. His solution elegant, simple, almost poetic. Judges leaned forward in astonishment. One whispered to another, "This boy, he's on another level." Richard felt his chest tighten with pride. This wasn't just talent. It was brilliance born of struggle, sharpened by resilience, fueled by love for family and hope for the future. He knew he was witnessing something extraordinary. When the final bell rang, the room fell silent. Papers were collected. Judges retreated to deliberate, and tension filled the air like a storm waiting to break. Competitors exchanged nervous glances, some hopeful, others resigned. But Noah sat quietly, hands folded, eyes calm. For him, just being here was already a victory. At last, the head judge returned to the stage, holding the results. The room held its breath. "This year's top scorer," the judge announced, "and winner of the International Mathematics Competition Championship, Noah Simon, United States of America." The auditorium erupted in applause. Cheers echoed from every corner as Noah rose slowly to his feet, disbelief written across his face. For a moment, he looked like the same shy boy from economy class, but then he straightened his shoulders, walked to the stage, and accepted the medal that symbolized not just academic triumph, but the fulfillment of years of sacrifice and perseverance. Richard stood too, clapping harder than he ever had in any boardroom victory. Tears burned his eyes as he looked at Emma, still peacefully sleeping, and whispered, "You'll grow up knowing this man changed both our lives." As Noah held the medal high, flashes from cameras lit up the hall. He wasn't just a poor boy from Chicago anymore. He was a champion, a living testament that brilliance knows no boundaries of wealth, race, or circumstance. And in that moment, Noah Simon's name became a symbol, not just of mathematics, but of hope. The roar of applause still echoed in Noah's ears as he stepped off the stage, his medal glinting under the auditorium lights. For a moment, he just stood there, gripping it tightly, hardly believing what had just happened. He had done it. Against all odds, against every obstacle, he had proven himself on the world stage. But in the corner of his eye, Noah saw something even more powerful than the medal. Richard Whittaker, billionaire CEO, standing with tears in his eyes and baby Emma asleep against his chest. Richard was clapping with an intensity that made it clear this was more than admiration. This was respect. When the crowd began to disperse, Richard approached Noah. "Congratulations, champion," he said warmly. "You didn't just win a medal today, you won hearts. Including mine." Noah shifted nervously, still clutching his medal. "Thank you, sir. But honestly, I didn't do this just for me. I did it for my mom, my grandma, my little brothers and sisters, for every kid back home who's told their dreams are too big." Richard nodded slowly. "That's exactly why I want to talk to you. Noah, you have something rare. Talent is one thing, but talent with humility, discipline, and purpose? That's what changes the world." Noah blinked. "What are you saying?" Richard took a deep breath, the weight of the moment heavy in his voice. "I want to invest in you. Not like I invest in companies, but in your future. Full scholarship, mentorship, connections, whatever it takes to get you to MIT, to the places where your genius belongs." Noah froze, his eyes wide. You'd do that? For me?" Richard smiled faintly. "You saved me, Noah. Not just by calming my daughter, but by reminding me of something I'd forgotten. That brilliance can come from anywhere. That true worth isn't measured in dollars. Consider this my way of paying forward what you gave me." Tears welled in Noah's eyes. He thought of his mother working double shifts, his grandmother humming lullabies while cooking beans and rice, his siblings looking up to him as their guide. This wasn't just an opportunity for him, it was salvation for his entire family. "I don't know what to say," Noah whispered. "Say yes," Richard replied simply. "And promise me one thing. When you make it, and you will make it, you'll reach back and pull someone else forward. Just like I'm doing for you." Noah nodded firmly, his voice steady now. "I promise." That night, back at the hotel, Richard sat with Emma on his lap while Noah called home. He watched as the boy's face lit up, as laughter and tears mixed while his mother screamed with joy on the other end of the line. It was the sound of hope being reborn. For Richard, it was a revelation. For years, his life had been about expansion, profit, and status. But watching Noah that night, he realized his true legacy wouldn't be the billions he had made. It would be the lives he had touched. The next morning, as the sun rose over London, Richard and Noah sat together in the hotel lobby, waiting for their rides. Two men from completely different worlds, one a billionaire CEO, the other a boy from Southside Chicago. Yet in that moment, they weren't divided by wealth or status. They were united by something far greater, faith in one another and in what the future could hold. Before parting ways, Richard extended his hand. "This is just the beginning, Noah." Noah shook it firmly, his medal gleaming in the morning light. "Yes, sir. Just the beginning." And with that, both of their lives shifted forever. Proof that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can change not only the course of one person's destiny, but two. Because greatness isn't about where you come from. It's about what you choose to do when opportunity knocks and whether you're brave enough to open the door. The plane soared high above the Atlantic, its engines humming like a steady heartbeat. Noah sat by the window, staring out at the endless stretch of clouds. Just days ago, he had boarded a plane to London as an anxious teenager, clutching onto the hopes of his community. Now he was returning as an international champion, with more than a trophy in his hands. He carried a promise, a future, and a partnership that could change everything. Richard sat across the aisle, Emma sleeping soundly against his chest. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt something he had long forgotten: peace. He looked at Noah and realized the boy wasn't just a prodigy. He was proof that greatness could rise from the most unexpected places. Noah glanced at Emma and smiled. "Funny," he said softly. "It all started with a crying baby." Richard chuckled, nodding, "and ended with hope. For both of us." As the plane cut through the sky, both of them understood something profound. Sometimes life doesn't test us with equations or boardrooms. It tests us with compassion. Noah's decision to act, to help when no one else did, had opened doors neither of them could have imagined. When they landed back in the United States, Noah wasn't invisible anymore. He was living proof that one act of kindness, combined with determination and faith, could rewrite destiny. He had gone from a boy in economy class to a young man standing shoulder to shoulder with a billionaire, not because of wealth, but because of character. And Richard? He had found more than just a caregiver for his daughter. He had found someone who reminded him of his own journey, someone who would carry forward a vision of using brilliance not for power, but for people. The story of Noah and Richard wasn't just about a crying baby or a mathematics competition. It was about the bridges built between privilege and struggle, between compassion and opportunity. In the end, the lesson was simple. True greatness doesn't come from where you start. It comes from the choices you make when faced with a moment to act. And Noah? He had chosen kindness. That one choice changed everything.